Welcome to The Review, a Rev partnership podcast, where we host conversations that share the power of public education and its impact on our region. I'm your host, Dr. Elizabeth Brands. In each episode, we will explore the stories, insights, and conversations that shape the future of student learning and growth in our region. Tarrant County is a community with incredible power and potential. At the heart of this power is our public education. Education is more than just a foundation. It's a catalyst for transformation. Let's jump into the episode. Welcome to The Review, a Rev partnership podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Elizabeth Brands. Today's conversation is centered around wraparound services that are provided by our school districts and how outside agencies and school districts are working together to support students throughout our region. Today, we are joined by Adam Powell, the new president and CEO of Tarrant Area United Way, Dr. Karen Molinar, superintendent of Fort Worth ISD, and Misty, the director of health services at Crowley ISD. Thank you, all three of us, for joining us today.
Excited to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Adam, 4 weeks into the job, you're
Yep.
joining us here in Tarrant County as the new president and CEO of the United Way. And you come to the United Way after 20 years of experience in the nonprofit sector, most recently at Communities in Schools over across the way in our neighboring Dallas County. You and I have had the opportunity to sit down together, and I would certainly attest to the fact that you are a strategic leader and have a proven career of being able to drive community impact and have a tremendous vision and passion for how we are making sure that we are tackling the needs and opportunities of kids at a system scale to really get at those root causes that are precluding too many kids in our community from thriving in the way that our community has a shared goal of supporting kids. So we welcome you to the United Way. 4 weeks in, is there kind of one anecdote that stands out to you about your time here in Tarrant County?
I think it's interesting. I think day two, we were doing some work in the maternal health space, and NBC puts a camera in front of my face 24 hours into the role and asking me to unpack all these things that we've done over the last several years. So that was a fun experience, but it's been really good. It's been I've been incredibly pleased with just how open and how passionate about our work that the Tarrant County community has seemed to be.
Wonderful. Well, and Dr. Karen Molinar, superintendent of Fort Worth ISD, you have called Fort Worth ISD home for a long time and have served many different roles. And in speaking to your colleagues across the district, you are a well-respected and loved leader for the listening approach that you take to teachers, to principals, to school administrators, even district administrators. Your career has spanned multiple roles across Fort Worth ISD, and your reputation for being a strategic visionary, having operational expertise, and a commitment to student success. And one of the things that I have particularly admired about you is while the role of somebody like a superintendent is to be that chief thinker for a school district, you balance that really well with also being a chief doer and understanding like what is that experience like for a second grade teacher in our school district or a third grade teacher, and really making sure that you have that boots on the ground experience that informs the leadership role and the community facing, external facing role that you have. So you're new to this role, a couple weeks, month into the job, not this specific job, although you've spent a long time at Fort Worth ISD. What are you most excited about in terms of stepping into the title of superintendent?
It's really just leading the work. We recently adopted our district strategic plan that our board, voted 9-0. So that's our anchor for the next 4 to 5 years, is really driving forward with literacy being our focus. Yeah. And for me, literacy has always been a passion. Definitely not where we need to be, and we have a long way to go. But we now have a plan and a roadmap. And now it's the action steps. It's bringing our community in, bringing our teachers, bringing our assistants, our principals, our APs, and more importantly, our students along, and just focusing on literacy, but watching our district thrive. Yeah. It's going to be percentage points, not growth where we want it to go as fast as we want statistically, but just the feeling that we're seeing the gains and have the momentum. So Just excited about that. Just everyone is engaged. The city, their support around literacy helps the sense of urgency. And it really is a great motivator for myself as well as our internal staff.
Wonderful. And Misty, welcome today from Crowley ISD. You're a graduate of Crowley ISD as well, and back in your alma mater district to support kids in your role as the Director of Health Services. You've spent some time in Everman ISD as well, and so have multiple perspectives to bring from kind of what the lived experience of kids look like in a couple of different neighborhoods. During your time in Crowley and Everman, you have made a huge impact on student health and well-being. You have a very strong background in the healthcare field and its commitment to creating healthier futures for students and communities alike. And one of the things that really stands out to me about your resume is the work that you and the role that you had at Cook Children's with their STAR Medicaid program, and how you then were able to not only take your experience from being in a school district to your role at Cook's, but then kind of back taking that experience from Cook's into your role at Crowley and how those have informed each other. So what's something to you that stands out in terms of a student story in one of those places that you've been, Everman, Cook's, Crowley?
Well, I mean, one of the unique perspectives of being even a student nurse is that I was able to see, and being in the same kind of community for so many years, is that I actually, in my student nurse rotation, I was with the nurse at Crowley High School, and she was listening to a student that had come in with some anxiety issues over his relapse of his leukemia. And I listened how she just listened to him and gave him a safe place to be able to speak to, the things that he was feeling and going through, and some of the fears that he had for his family as well as himself. And when I thought, wow, that I didn't realize a school nurse would be able to do, all these things. And so I remember taking that back to me, and I would never have guessed that in less than a year, I would be at the bedside and he would be one of my patients that I would be taking care of. Yeah. And I remember that. And that is not the only time that has happened. I have taken care of kids, kids in the PICU, pediatric ICU, that then I would be their nurse, their school nurse for later on at Everman. And it's just a privilege to be able to see the things that we do in the hospital and then how that in turn, those students and how we take care of them in the school system as well. Yeah. And so it's been really impactful.
Well, thank you, Misty. So today we're here to talk about these students that the federal and state government, they define as economically disadvantaged. That term is used based on the income level of the child's family. These students are really school dependent. They're dependent on the needs and services within each of the campuses, the 600 campuses across Tarrant County, to meet and sometimes their very basic needs. And we're here to paint a better picture of what that looks like in our community and what that looks like at a district and campus level, and to tease out really how districts have landed in this spot to be providing these holistic, comprehensive services for kids, and really why you have taken up that mantle of doing that in terms of its connection to the mission of our public education system, which is really the academic development, growth, and proficiency of students. So with that, we're going to jump into the episode. We hear a lot about how Tarrant County, the DFW region as a whole, is growing. And we tout that as a tremendous accomplishment and achievement for our region as industry is seeking out our area to bring new businesses and to bring those jobs that complement that industry growth. In Tarrant County, about 60% of students show up every day at school with that designated as economically disadvantaged. And again, that's looking at the family's income level. And this ranges from school districts in our county that include Everman, Crowley, Kennendale to the south, and our suburbs of Carroll, Grapevine, Keller, more to the north. In the last 5 years, our student population has shifted and it's changed. We've seen an 8% increase in that economically disadvantaged number of students in the last 5 years. We've seen a 14% increase in the number of students that are enrolled in Tarrant County school districts where they're an English language learner, meaning they may speak a different first language at home in their houses. And we've seen a 4% increase as an aggregate across the region in special education students. And for some of our districts, that special ed number has increased in that same time period by upwards of 18%. So again, on average, at that 4% increase. We also have seen an increase in students that are highly mobile. So in the region, about one in every 5 students is defined as highly mobile. That means that they are only attending that school campus for 8 weeks during the school year. And those 8 weeks are not always 8 consecutive weeks. They can be 8 weeks throughout the course of an academic year. And I make that point just to kind of double click on that data point. And to say that when a kid is moving around that much and they don't have the continuity of learning environment, it's a hill that they have to climb when they are changing the learning environment and context that frequently and that regularly. I mean, I think if we all pause for a second and think about a second grader or a third grader who's 7 or 8 years old and they're moving from one teacher in one building and they're changing buildings, that new building might have different processes or procedures of how to get to class, how to get through the cafeteria lunch line. Even the teacher in front and the kid sitting to their left and right in the classroom looks different than in their previous class. Those are all things that kids need to adjust to that can create a hill for them to climb before they're even opening their reading or math textbook. And so this is what our kids look like in Tarrant County. These are the kids who show up at our 600 ISD campuses every single day that each of our school district leaders has the moral and legal responsibility to serve and educate. And when kids show up in our school system with these kinds of contextual factors in their lives and in their families, our school districts stand tall and they respond. And they respond in a number of different ways to make sure that every child has what they need to be able to be in a place where they can learn. So Karen, in Fort Worth ISD, the numbers I gave were really an aggregate across the region. But can you talk a little bit about what this looks like in your school district, the largest district here in our county, and what supports you are providing students and how kids are impacted in a positive way by those supports?
Yeah, so Fort Worth ISD, we're 86% economically disadvantaged, and honestly, we're higher than that. That's just the data we're able to gather and get back from our parents. We currently have free breakfast and lunch district-wide, or what we call a CIP district. So every student, regardless of their financial background, receives free and reduced free lunch and breakfast on our campuses. And then we have over 70 sites of Fort Worth after-school programming that many of them receive dinner that we also at select sites open for our community members as well. That's just the start. In addition to that, we have 73 what we call food pantries or markets across our district where we actually are running mini grocery stores, where we open those up 2 to 3 days a week for our parents and our community to come and receive groceries, food goods. I was at Thrive Market 1 year anniversary at OD Wyatt a few weeks ago. They supplied diapers, just hygiene needs as well. That's what schools are now providing, not only to their students and parents, but also community members, which is very important. We're very grateful to have the donations through those. However, we do have to, facility-wise, supply the sites, and then we utilize our parent engagement specialists to help run those markets. But one of the great things I like to look at the positive side, our Thrive Market at OD Wyatt, our students are running that. They're stocking the shelves, they're doing inventory, they're shopping for it. So our business students are learning supply supply and demand supply chain methods and different business. So there's also, how are we teaching our students through the resources we're providing on a daily basis? But that's the need. Like you were saying earlier, our students have to be able to be fed before they can learn. They have to know when they go home, they also have food on the table. And that also helps their parents, ease the parents' mind. Our thing is help your kids with their homework, read with your students, and we want them to do that. But when they're worried about how are they going to fix dinner that night for their students and their family, that's where we are coming in also to step in and help. And then would help with our funders and our partners doing that as well. I remember as a principal, and I had CIS on my campus and a big CIS supporter. And we would do Friday backpacks. We would pack backpacks every Friday, line them up in the hall, and our students would take them home and then bring them back on Monday. And I look at how the need has changed. That was once a week on a Friday, a backpack. Yeah. Now we're talking, we have actual grocery stores on our campuses that we open 2 to 3 days a week. So there is a need, a city need, a community need that we're trying to help, really, step in. But that's a bigger need we need to think about. Like what do our families need to survive, and how can we help them?
Yeah. And those backpacks that you were sending home were filled with food, I imagine, for the kids for the weekend.
And non-perishable, but that was just to get them through a weekend. And now, like I said, the need is a lot greater.
Yeah. And Misty, you were talking about a similar story at Crowley ISD with food and how then students are supporting kind of some of those social services. So in your role, what do you see as kind of the primary needs and services of families in the Crowley ISD district?
We do. We did open our first market, the Ready to Learn market, and we do utilize our students, actually in our functional academics, to help learn those trade skills and things that will transfer over once they graduate, and help them be successful. I also see, and I agree with Dr. Molinar, we need. It is imperative that we bring those resources to our families. It was in the day, 20 years ago, 10 years ago even, where we would give families resources to food pantries, for example, or to different maybe counseling services or things of that nature. And now we need to bring those food pantries. I mean, look how many markets you have in Fort Worth ISD, and we're going to open our second one here soon. And we're excited about that. But bringing those services, wraparound services, that once we're thought we would hand resources out in our blue book, now we are actually bringing those resources in to our community, to our school. As these students are so school dependent for all of where we can meet all the needs of the students and those basic needs, those Maslow's.
So ladies, talk a little bit about, and I just want to, make sure we're painting a picture of this. Talk a little bit about kind of the why, or like what shifted in school districts to say, wait, we need to be providing not just backpacks, but pantries with food, or we need to be not just providing, one backpack on the weekend, but clothes when families are cold. What was that shift like in a school district that raised the attention or the spotlight that this was a support that school districts really did feel the need to step into?
For us, it was when you really start to engage with a student when they come in tardy, and you ask them, hey, are you okay? I'm hungry. That's where it really first started. And I'll just say, like, as a witness, as an administrator, as a teacher, when your students come in tardy, or even come to school, they don't have to be tardy, you can tell in their eyes how they're feeling. It's when that first touch, that first point of engagement, and when you start to see how many of our students, and then you're just like, okay, here's a breakfast bar, And then when 4 or 5 others in the classroom say, I didn't have breakfast as well. And then you hear, well, what did you have for dinner last night? Yeah. I mean, it's that engagement first when you first really starting to lean in and talk to your kids. And then, okay, you didn't have dinner last night, or whatever you had for dinner, you know, you shared, or it wasn't enough. You didn't have breakfast. Yeah. So, of course, you're not ready to learn. Yeah. And then, okay, well, then you talk to the parent. Hey, they didn't have dinner last night. How are things going? Well, we're struggling right now. And it's like Misty was saying, you find the resource. Yeah. And then it's too much. It's too much. The resources can't handle the needs of the parents. And then for us, of course, COVID happened for all of us. And we became the distribution sites for breakfast and lunch. And I think for school districts, it was, if kids are not in school, they're really not eating. Yes. And then when we opened it up to the household, everyone could come pick up breakfast and lunch at our school sites during COVID. It was like the need is family wide. It's great. Yeah. You know, not just because of COVID, but there was a need there before that we really did not know. And then it was like, okay, we have to keep going. And that's COVID started it, and now we're actually accelerating it because the need has become even greater since COVID.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay. Well, Adam, I don't know if you know this, but the Tarrant Area United Way is really thought as an exemplar of social service support in our county. The United Way has taken on some really key initiatives and projects over the last several years, and you gave reference even to kind of the work on the maternal health side, and then your work going all the way through youth and young adults, really driving towards neighborhood security goals as well as workforce financial stability and security goals. So no pressure, but you know, you have a large responsibility in our region to support the shared goals we have of thriving communities. So share a little bit about how the United Way sees its role as being that county-wide social service provider, and what you are seeing in the data that you are looking at that really informs where you've made strategic investments as an organization.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we have to acknowledge up front is we use this expression that education is the great equalizer. And I think we believe that to be true. And if that's true, I think we also have to acknowledge that poverty is also the great destabilizer, right? And when you've got young people all across the county that are dealing with food insecurity, housing insecurity, just poverty overall, it takes me back, and Misty kind of mentioned this, it's sociology 101. It's Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Yeah. We expect these students to show up and be the best iteration of themselves academically, and you know, the reading, the writing, the arithmetic, but they're showing up hungry, or they're showing up because they had 2 jobs. They're sleepy because they're having to put food on the table for an absent parent, right? So really understanding some of those challenges. I think design thinking 101 is you go out into communities and you talk to people, right? And you figure out what they see as their challenges and their problems. And what we've tried to do at United Way is really lean into some of those conversations, right? So when we hear that we have students that are struggling with food insecurity, we're partnering with the Tarrant Area Food Bank, right? Yeah. When we see that there's students struggling with housing and just a litany of other issues, we're working with Meals on Wheels, right? We're doing all these things and bringing in these partners to really help mitigate some of those foundational challenges that students are having. One of the things that I think we do not give enough credence to is just how difficult it is for educators to work and do the work that they are tasked with doing when students are showing up ill-prepared to be there. And again, not to beat a dead horse, but kind of going back to that Maslow's, our space is how do we eliminate, or at the very least reduce the amount of social strife that students are feeling, and parents and families, so that when they show up to a Fort Worth ISD or to a Crowley ISD, they're prepared to learn, and then teachers and educators can do what they do best, which is move students from point A to point B. So for us, it's really about how we holistically kind of wrap our collective arms around students all across the county and ensure that the barriers that they're experiencing to academic success, we're able to remove those as much as possible.
Yeah. A year ago, Rev Partnership hosted a panel discussion with the superintendents from Tarrant County. And the topic of that panel discussion was around the impactful ways that districts had allocated their ESSER funding. ESSER funding was part of the COVID recovery packages under our former 2 presidents. And And that funding ran out last December. And so kind of before the money was set to expire, we wanted to get superintendents on a panel to talk about the ways that they had used those dollars to support kids. And at the opening of the panel discussion, and we hosted it at Eagle Mountain Saginaw and invited the extended community to attend, we shared data across all academic metrics from preschool through post-secondary completion and graduation, and across all major academic metrics over the last 5 years, spanning pre-COVID through post-COVID. Academic achievement was on an upward trajectory. The year of COVID, of course, the scores really plummeted, but as a whole, the arrow of data was trending upward and to the right in a very positive way. And when we asked our superintendent leaders, what would you say is the number one influencer of why we have seen this steady and significant growth, especially post-COVID, in these indicators? Every single superintendent, and I have to say, I've talked to these superintendents for a couple of years and, have been involved in the education space here since I started my job here in 2017. And I was surprised by their answer. Every single one of them said something related to mental health and social supports for kids. Yes. There was not one superintendent who talked about the fabulous new curriculum that they had purchased for their district, or even professional development that they had done for teachers on a curriculum and instruction side. And it really stopped me in my tracks. And I think, too, for those of us who are maybe less familiar with what the lived experience of our kids looks like, and again, when we have 60% of our children who are economically disadvantaged, that term that the federal government uses, the federal government defines that as a family of four who's making $40,500. So 60% of our families are living in that situation here. And these are our neighbors, our children. And so the superintendent's response really, it stopped me because I would not have expected, them to have said that. And it begs, I think, the question of, is this really your role? Is this really your role when a superintendent is saying, the number one most impactful thing I did with historic funding that I've ever received wasn't related to books and pencils and what we would think of traditional academics. It was related to the supports, mental and physical supports that districts were providing kids. And so I put that question out there, and Adam, even interested in your response to that. But I think it does beg the question of, should this be a public education system's responsibility? And just what's your take on that, Misty?
Well, should it be? That's an interesting question. It is. Mm-hmm. I look at that we are responsible for these children. This is our future, right? And 5 days a week, 8 or more hours a day with our after school programs and things that we put in play. And so it is imperative that we are able to give these students a chance, and really delve down to the root causes. The mental health crisis, we were on the verge of a mental health crisis. What COVID did was sped it up about 10 years. And we did not have the time to plan or get infrastructure in place. Therefore, we saw such a raw emotion of a raw time of different emotions and the needs in our community. And I think I'm safe to say that we've talked about that in different places that I've been a part in. And I saw that in the hospital, on the hospital side, being the manager for the case managers and things. We saw the rates of suicide attempts going up. And, but what happened with COVID was that all of that was exposed. So it's really important to find those root causes to discipline or to the lack of resources and help build that family and give them the things and the tools that they need, because we can help the student, but that's kind of like putting a Band-Aid on a gaping wound. We can only do so much.
Yeah.
But if we can help the family, we can maybe stop some of the generational poverty that's occurring.
Yeah. Karen, you've worked in public education, long enough to know that you're stepping into a role as superintendent where, maybe a decade ago, we would have thought of it as a purely academic role. But again, you've been a public school educator for long enough to know you're stepping into the role of superintendent where you're held accountable to your school board and the community for education outcomes of kids. You also have to manage one of the largest city's transportation fleets of buses to get kids to and from school. And then on top of that, you're providing wraparound services for kids from clinics to food pantries. So talk a little bit about, how you see that, the necessity of that integrating, if it's really into, the role of superintendent and the role of a public school district.
Well, we don't have a choice. So it is our role. I'll use today for an example here in Fort Worth today. It's below zero with wind chill when we woke up. And the last 2 days we had to make a decision. Do we come to school or not? And the decision making encompassed everything you just said. One, transportation, buses, and making sure our bus drivers are there because students would be outside. Clothing. Our students are going to be prepared to walk to school because we have a lot of neighborhood schools. And we have more walkers than we do bus riders, believe it or not. And then, but for me, it was food. And it was safe place for my students. And there's never a right or wrong decision on calling school off. And, it depends on, the family and their opinion of it. But I had to think about over 70,000 students. What would happen if they were not in school yesterday and today? And for me, it was breakfast and lunch, heat, and then being safe because their parents still had to go to work. How many of the parents would have left home and who would they have been left home with? Or who they would have said, you need to go somewhere and where would they be dropped off at? Those are hard decisions for our parents. So that is what we're doing as a district in every decision making. We have to think about just not the academics. And then, of course, the other side of me is like, that's 2 days without instruction for my students. And so that's huge because our students don't, in my opinion, come to school enough. They need to come to school more days. That's not a popular opinion according to them. But so 2 days of lost instruction is 2 days of, that's a lot of lost time for reading and math. So that's our decision making on a daily basis of like, how do you protect that whole child? But then you look at teachers, and I'm a teacher. I always say that. When I went to college, I was very lucky. I went to a college in Maryland that taught me how to teach reading, the science of reading, and how to be a teacher. And the universities are still, their programs are very philosophy based, and they come into a classroom and now they're a counselor, they're a nutritionist, they're a teacher in there somewhere, and then they're a communicator with parents, and there are all these roles that they're not prepared for, but the expectation is that they still have to manage it and then also grow a student over a year's growth. So that's also my worry on a daily is like, how do I protect the teaching profession and get people to say, I want to be a teacher when we're asking you to do is way beyond being a teacher. Honestly, that's where I struggle with. It's not, should it be our role? It is our role. Now, how can others help us so the teachers can do their roles? And I need support for the other places so my teachers can just teach. Go ahead.
I'll double click on kind of the question. So at the peak of COVID, about 1 in 6 students, about 18% of students had either considered taking their own life or knew a close friend that had considered taking their own life. So, if you're not a numbers person and don't understand like qualitatively what that means, there's 6 of us in this room, right? I mean, that's incredibly powerful to think about the number of students that during that time were thinking about taking their own lives. And I think, to Misty's point earlier, this is something that existed pre-COVID. COVID exacerbated it. Whether it's the school district's responsibility. I think it has landed on the school district's plate. But what I will say even more broadly is I do think it's the responsibility of the educational ecosystem, right? Which is, sure, that includes the school district, starts and ends there, but it also includes nonprofits, right? It includes the United Ways of the world, et cetera. And I think if we have identified that as a challenge, as a problem, which clearly we have, I do think we all have kind of this moral imperative as we think about our own program designs and how we want to be good partners and how we want to support school districts. We have to be sensitive to the fact that that is something that we should be thinking about, and we should also be building that muscle as an ecosystem, even more broadly than just the school districts. Unfortunately, this gets placed at their feet.
Yeah.
And what we want to do is come along and be good partners, whether that means standing up programming, whether that means identifying within our community organizations that are doing this work and doing it well.
Yeah.
Whatever that looks like, I think it requires a heightened level of support that we on the outside as well are willing to give school districts, because they shouldn't be burdened with handling these big, complex, nuanced challenges alone.
Yeah. So I think you raised some great points. And one of the things that has come up as a theme on this podcast across the number of different topics we've had is this idea of partnership. But when we've talked about partnership, it's been important to me to really push on that word. We use that word a lot. And I think there's certainly, a spectrum of what a partnership can look like. And, Adam, as we've had conversations, you really strike me as somebody who understands what like an intentional, authentic, action-driven partnership looks like. And so how are you thinking about that with the cadre of services that the United Way and programming that you have built up, and its intersection and connection with our school districts and what Misty and Karen are talking about here in terms of what the lived experience of kids looks like and the importance of whether the word is should or responsibility or what it is, like districts are stepping up to serve kids in all shapes and forms in whatever way they are coming to the front door of classrooms across our region. So I'm going to push you on the partnership thing to really get at, like diving into what does that like authentic, action-driven, partnership look like, and what's the United Way's role in that?
Yeah, I think for us, it's really as an organization identifying who we want to be. Right? What is the role that we're going to play? We've made a very intentional decision through our strategic planning process that the three primary pillars in which we're going to play are education and learning, community health, and basically poverty alleviation, right? Financial empowerment. And I think in the education and learning lane, I think, again, being even more specific in terms of saying, okay, how do we want to play in this space? Are we looking at high school graduation rates? Are we looking at third and fourth grade literacy? Are we looking at college enrollment? And those are the questions that we're vacillating and having kind of internally now. Yeah. But what I will point out, and this gets to the point of partnership, is that is not a decision that we on our own will make. That is a decision that is talking to the Mistys of the world, the Dr. Molinars of the world, and really talking to the content experts and saying, how can we plug in? Yeah. Right? Like, where do you see us as having value to you all? In a meaningful and thoughtful way. And as we compile all that information, both quantitative data, qualitative from conversations that we're having with superintendents, with education leaders, et cetera, you really start to amalgamate those things and say, okay, now we've taken in all this information. How can we use this in a strategic way to build out how we want to be supporters of education and learning in this space? And again, that should be done incredibly collaborative. From there, you start looking at who are the players in the space, who are the people in the after-school space, for example, that are doing this well, the Boys and Girls Clubs, the Girls Inc., et cetera, et cetera. And really from there, we're going to flesh out kind of our really concrete strategic vision, which will be public and everyone will know what it is. They'll know how we plan on plugging in. And again, that'll be in a way that is supportive of the people that I consider to be the aficionados in this space, which are the two sitting to my left here, along with other education leaders.
Yeah. So when on the district side, when you think about the components that make a partnership like truly value add to your work, what do those partnerships entail when it's truly taking something off your plate, or adding value to the work that you're doing? We know that partnerships can come with some work, but the ones that, at the end of the day create a positive return. What are the components or the pieces of those partnerships that, really, really do that?
I think for us that having those partnerships that you can make really customizable to meet the needs of the students, because they're all different, right? For example, we worked with United Way not very long ago, and our 1 second, we were awarded the 1 second collaborative.
Yep.
Yes. Yep. Which, helped us address some of the contributing factors to gun violence, gang violence, the mental health, behavioral health issues. There was a panel discussion with different community leaders that we had at the table, as well, even some clergy from our community. Then we had a field trip to a place where it was actually one of our churches in the community. We work very closely with our partners there, and we were able to talk about conflict resolution, do some engagement on effective communication, things like that with these students. And we targeted our students in alternative school as a way to reduce their time that they're spending there. And so because of our partnership, and then we had a Saturday event where families came, and we were able to give family counseling on grief, trauma, different things, whatever. There were 18 different topics that they could choose from. So trying to make that customizable so that it can meet the needs of whoever was coming to the event. And I think that's really important, when you're talking about collaborations. What are the needs? Really kind of like a risk assessment, if you will, of the needs that you have in your district. And then looking at those different partners that you have and how you can work together to meet the needs and eliminate barriers.
Do you have anything to add, Karen?
I think I like to say continuous improvement. I think we start partnerships, and we kind of like what Misty was saying, we may not make them custom for the campus or for our students, but we find partners, and then we feel like we have to just keep doing what we're doing. We don't take time to say, is it helping us with the root cause of whatever that risk assessment showed us? Are we seeing the results that we want to see? Are we getting the outcomes for students? And taking the time between each other in a two-way to say, let's stop sometimes and look at it and say, what can we tweak? And we sometimes, when it's not working, we just say, all right, no more funding, we're done. And it was working somehow for some in some capacity, and then we just pulled it. And then we want to start something new, like we have like this new magic program. So it's like taking the time out to say, okay, let's just tweak this a little bit and change it up and make it stronger. And that's on both sides. And the district has to do better about being more vocal and saying, thank you, but it's not quite getting us what we need. Can we tweak this a little bit? And then having that partner lean in and say yes, because we're all here for the same goal.
Yes. Okay. Misty and Karen, I think you were both getting to kind of the importance of customizing the partnership, customizing to meet the specific needs of your context, whether it's the district context, a campus context. And Misty, we heard a story about you specifically kind of meeting the context of a particular family. It gets all the way down to the family level, that on the leaving today's podcast and heading back to Crowley, that you're going to pick up some clothes for a family because their specific context is saying they need some warm winter clothes this time of year. And you're responding to that specific context and need by delivering kind of exactly what they need. I think that's
Absolutely.
A small example of how school districts are responding even at the student and family level to meet them where they are, respond with what they need, and then set them on the path to be able to open those math and reading textbooks in a place where that kid feels safe and secure and in the headspace where they can learn. And I just want to, because I think this point is important. And so I just want to kind of restate a couple of things and paint the picture again. We live in a community where we have seen an increase in the percentage of students over the last 5 years that are economically disadvantaged increase by 8 percentage points. We have 1 in every 5 students who is highly mobile. They're moving between schools, campuses, even districts, not consistently in one place for more than 8 weeks at a time. And these families are taking home about $40,500. And they show up at our 17 independent school districts every single day with the desire to learn and the desire to be successful as they move through their life's trajectory. And we kind of posed this question of, is this the role of our public education system? And I think what we're hearing very clearly from you is maybe that's not even the right question, because you feel you have taken on it as your responsibility. Whether it should or shouldn't be is not the question that we're asking. It's more, you have stood up to the plate and answered the call that when these kids show up, you respond with what they need before you can even get to the mission and vision imperative that we have for our public education system of academic achievement and advancement. And I think that point really, deserves a couple exclamation points and a yellow highlight over it, to not be underscored or understated enough that regardless of if it is a should, our public education system has stepped into that role of providing whole wraparound services that kids need. And I think, one of the roles that Rev Partnership has tried to play is to lift up bright spots in our public education system. This fall, we launched a Caught You Being Awesome media campaign where our team independently reviewed the publicly available academic data in all 17 school districts. And we made a point to make sure every district was featured in our Caught You Being Awesome campaign. We got some great video content at Fort Worth ISD, some of the work happening in the early learning and CTE programming there. Because we think it's important to lift up these stories that you're talking about today and the work that our districts are doing to meet students where they are and serve them. And so as we kind of move to the conclusion, I would love to hear from each of you, what is a bright spot in your organization that really gets you excited, that gets you up each day with further determination and passion and persistence to do this work, because you're really proud of this thing that your organization is tackling and moving forward. Karen, maybe we'll start with you.
Mine's just every day, each day, watching our doors open and accepting kids. I mean, that honestly is the bright spot, because what happens once you enter the doors, it's amazing. And our scores are not where they need to be, but we're more than scores. You go in the art room, you go in the music room, you go in the gym. I mean, just the after school activities. You go in a literacy room. Yesterday, as cold as it was outside, I'm getting pictures of students doing fractions together and, whole group. It's parent-teacher conferences that we hosted on Monday. Every day, our buildings that the doors open and the lights are on, that's a bright spot. Yeah. Because there's something great going on in every single building every day.
Thanks, Karen.
For me, I think, one of the things is that the opportunities that we're able to give our students that they wouldn't otherwise get. We had several students that went on Monday with our board of trustees, and they were able, we have, I think, one of the only known in Texas student trustees on our board. And they have the opportunity to serve on our board alongside of our school board. And they will bring bright spots from their campus, the things that are happening that they're excited about. And they'll also bring concerns. And they've actually brought concerns. I can even think of maybe some health concerns or different things that then we investigate and we are challenged and tasked as a district to come back with a solution for them. And that's giving students their voice. So students don't just know, it's not something we just say that student voice is important, but they know their voice is important.
Yeah. Thank you, Misty. Adam?
I'll answer it this way. I grew up in a house with a father who was a police officer. He was a state trooper for 27 years. He was the first black state trooper in the town that we lived in Alabama, where I grew up. My mom was a social worker. She worked at the VA Medical Center. She worked for Child Protective Services for years. So I grew up with this commitment to service. And by the time I had reached college, I had no idea what I wanted to do, but I had just a variety of interest, right? And it was primarily around service and problem solving. So how do we eradicate homelessness? How do we, reduce HIV and AIDS in communities across the country? How do we eliminate poverty, or at the very least reduce it, right? All these things. And I had a professor my senior year of high school that said, if you want to change all that, he said, get an education. And I am incredibly proud and honored that I get the opportunity every day to walk into the doors of an organization that is committed to not only all those other social ills and injustices that I think exist, but we're committed to solving it through education. Yes. And more importantly, we're committed to solving it through partnership. Yeah. So that is what gets me up in the morning, and that's what I'm palpably excited about moving forward.
Thank you, Adam, and Karen and Misty, and not just for your time today, but even more so for the dedication and persistence with which you do this work. You are faced with tackling some of the largest and most complex and complicated social challenges that our kids and families will ever face, and the intersection of those being at the front doors of your schools and classrooms every day. And we know that there are more kids in our community than we want there to be who are dependent on the services that happen within your classrooms. And those services, as you've shared with us today, extend well beyond the academic instruction and start with the social needs and basic needs that they need to be able to learn. And so we just share our heartfelt thank you and appreciation and gratitude for the leadership roles that you have in our community. Our kids are better because of it, and our city will be better because of it as well. So thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to The Review, a Rev Partnership podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to subscribe and follow us so that you never miss an episode. For more information on Rev Partnership, please visit our website at revpartnership.org and follow us on social media. Until next time, thank you.